Hi all, this is Karthik from Design School for WordPress Beginners, the place where I teach you how to design, build and customize your websites. If you are new here, consider subscribing. Let's get into today's video. In this video, I want to teach you the basics of HTML. Well, why do I want to do that? Because once you understand the HTML properly, we're not going to write any code here. I'm just going to teach you what HTML is, how it works, especially on the WordPress website, so that you can take any code from the internet and port it just by understanding HTML and CSS. I'll be discussing about CSS in another video, but now we'll discuss about HTML. HTML is essentially the structure of your website. So if you think of your website as a house, so all the walls, all the bricks, all those are HTML elements, all the lights. So the best way to put it is whatever you see on your website is an HTML element. So when you inspect, it can be Elementor page, it can be DV builder page, any page or a page built with themes. So whatever it is, when you click on inspect, all you see here is HTML. So you can see that it says HTML. So whatever is below this is all HTML. You can also view elements. You can also click on them and inspect. So you can click on that and it will show the HTML tags. And how does HTML work? And what do you have to know and do about HTML on WordPress? So if you're using WordPress, all the HTML that you need is supplied by the page builders, your themes, or even your third-party plugins. It can be add-ons of your page builders, it can be anything. So whatever widget that you see with an Elementor is actually an HTML element. So heading corresponds to an HTML element with a style and function. So all these are HTML elements, and the same goes for Gutenberg as well. So when you write content or make something, it's all HTML. All the blocks in Gutenberg or anything on your website that you make with all the themes, plugins or page builders is HTML. So HTML is the way to display elements, and your browser understands these elements and displays them to you. If you're using a WordPress website or if you're on a WordPress website, chances are that you'll never have to write HTML. You just have to understand HTML because HTML is already supplied by your themes, page builders and other third-party plugins. You just have to understand the structure of the elements. We've been doing this in Elementor Basics playlist. So we've been inspecting each and every widget and we're examining the HTML structure so that we can change any property of any element. So the way CSS works is that it styles HTML elements. But in order to understand CSS better, you need to understand HTML better, which is why I'm making this course. So HTML again is an easy language and I'll show you how to get started. So here I have a post, a Gutenberg post, and I have an HTML block ready for me so that I can type the code. And if you're on a page builder such as Elementor, you can also use the HTML widget to do the same. And if you're on other page builders, they'll have a widget called code. So you can open up the code widget, you can drag it into the area and start typing HTML. So we're going to learn HTML in the practical way. I'm not going to show you how to write code, but I'm just going to show you what happens when you actually add code to your website. So this is how the code is added by your themes or your page builders or your plugins. All the HTML is actually coming from them, and the way they do it, I'll show you how it's constructed. How does HTML work? HTML works based on tags. So these angular braces, so this is called an opening tag. So whatever you specify within, so if I say h2 and then there'll be a closing tag for that, and the closing tag has to be same as the opening tag. So I'm actually saying, hey, this is a heading 2, or if I change this to h1, I'm saying this is a heading 1, and even the closing tag has to be the same. If you're confused, just minimize the side panel on Elementor page, just build any page or just import any template and start inspecting it. So HTML works based on tags, as I said, like this. And when you preview that, there's nothing. That's because you didn't include any content within. So if you say this is a heading, and let's preview this now, you can see that it's already bold and it has a particular font size defined in the theme. Let's do the same with the Elementor HTML widget. So I'll just bring this back with an HTML. I'll say h2 opening tag, and closing tag has to be the same, except closing tag has this / before the tag name, and between these opening and closing tags you have your content. So that's how it works. So you say this is a heading, and you can see that here. So that's how it works. Again, if you have Gutenberg, you can start typing within Gutenberg itself, or if you have Elementor or any other page builder, you can simply start typing HTML here and you'll see the results live. So that's great. So what are the basic tags in HTML? The first and foremost, the main tag is HTML tag itself. So it will be something like this, and it specifies the browser that we have started adding HTML. You generally don't have to add this because it's already there within the page level, and the browser automatically understands HTML, so you don't have to type that all the time. Let's inspect this page again, and at the very beginning you see the HTML tag, and the basic HTML tag shows the language in which the page is made. So it says ENUS, which stands for US English, and there's a class for HTML element as well. So within that you have all the layout of the page, and if you scroll through to the bottom, you find a closing tag of HTML. So we opened the tag there and it's closed over here. So within this HTML you'll be adding all your elements, so they'll be having their own tags, and you can see there's a closing body tag here, so they'll be opening body tag somewhere. So it'll be right in the beginning. So here you have it. So opening tag and closing tag, and if you hover over this is a div. We'll talk about that in a bit, but just again see that div ID. So it is the opening tag and this div is the closing tag. So this element is all within this line. The same goes for this element. This is a script, so it's a JavaScript. Again, we'll talk about that in a bit later. So again, there is a div, and all these elements, they either have a class or ID. So the reason why we give ID or classes is that we can target these elements specifically by CSS or JavaScript. So if you want to change the style of this element, especially this element, you can target it using the class or ID. ID is unique to an element, so on one page you can have only one ID, or ID must be really unique, just like DNA. And the class can be repetitive, so multiple elements can have the same class. So whatever style you give for that class will be applied to all the elements having that class name. Anyway, we'll just keep our discussion limited to HTML. Like I said, every HTML element has an opening and closing tag. So starting with the heading tags that specify the most important content on your page. So essentially, when you add an H2 or H1 or H3, so they are basically 6 heading tags. So all these specify most important content, and not just for the user but also for the search engines. Search engines understand what it is. So if you say this is a heading, and let's copy and paste this one more time. This time we'll change the tag to H2, so it's one less than the main heading. So let's add a space in between here. Let's preview this, and you can see that the H1 has a bigger font and it's really strong, and the H2 has a smaller font size. This is not just visual, even the search engines understand this. So when you add an H1 tag, there must be only one H1 tag on your page, and your search engines will think that that's the heading or the title of that page. It's usually used for the title of that page, or if you're writing a post, it will be for the heading or the post title. So that will be the title, and within that you'll have your content. So if you have multiple subheadings, you can have multiple H2s, or if you have multiple topics within headings, you can have H3. So that's how it works. These H1, H2 and until H6, they're all headings. Next we have paragraph element. So it's a normal element that has a base font size. So I'll change the opening and closing tag to P, which means this is some regular content, and let's change the content too. And you can see that all the styles are already defined in your theme, and these will change based on the theme and the customizer settings in WordPress. So if you have changed the style or the font size of your H1 in your theme, it will be reflected here, since Gutenberg inherits all the properties from your theme. So that's how it works. So you can see that H1 has the biggest font size, paragraph has the lowest font size. All these specify some content is being added within, and we've seen on multiple occasions. Of course, you can also add content directly between tags. It doesn't even have to be P. So you can say a div. We'll talk about div in a bit. So even this works, and you can see even that will display the content. It doesn't have to be paragraph. So within tags, you can simply put your text. So the tags specify what kind of HTML element that is. So we just saw H1 to H6. We also saw paragraph. There are some semantic elements. We'll talk about that in a bit. So basically this is how HTML works. So if you're wondering how your page is built with your page builders or themes, just build any page or just import a template and start inspecting that. And you can minimize this. You can see that my page is essentially made up of HTML. So this is the opening and closing HTML, and I have head tag, and within this I have all the important information. So this specifies all the metadata for my WordPress website. So the type of character encoding, all the links, all the icons, all these are basically included in head tag. So this head tag has all the information required to be displayed on the page. So my page is essentially made up of HTML and head tag and a body tag. So within this body, opening and closing body tag, I just have all my elements. So all this HTML, and this is a script, this is basically a JavaScript, so that affects the behavior. So in order to do particular things with your HTML elements, this will control that. But anyway, we'll leave the discussion or limit the discussion to HTML. So you can see there's a div and I have another div. You can keep inspecting and I can find all the elements within this page. So after all the scripts are loaded, I then have body, I then have head, and within that I can start hovering over each div HTML element and it will show what it is. When I hover over this, again this background overlay is essentially an HTML element. It's actually a div element. So we'll discuss about div in a bit. So all these can be inspected and now you get a basic hang of it. So if something has a minimizable drop down, that means all the elements are nested. So we'll talk about nesting too. So this is a section element, opening and closing tag, you can see here. So your first task, just build any page with a page builder or theme and inspect it using Chrome inspector or whatever browser you have, and you'll find all the HTML tags of those particular elements. So that's a good starting point to understand HTML. So after headings, after paragraph, we have another important HTML element, which is link, and we'll be using links most commonly in WordPress. And links have something called href, which says the page that is opened when you click on this link. So I can say this is my own website. So you need to copy the URL of your website. So I'll say wpexperimenter.com. I'll say link. Again, this is common. Opening tag and closing tag. HTML elements also have attributes. So attributes provide additional information about these elements. So HTML elements, so if it is a class attribute, so it says the class name of that element, and class attribute is used to target the element using CSS. If it's an ID attribute, again that's used to target the element using CSS or JavaScript. So links have this href within double quotes, and within those double quotes you have your URL. just like that. So this is the link. I just need to click on that and it opens up my website. So you can change the value of the link here and it will open that particular link. So A refers to a link. If you know the company href, so it's basically a backlink company. Again, they made this ahref as their company name, so it's basically link building, and that's quite smart of them. And if you heard of backlinko, again, that's a website focused more on teaching how to build links. Again, there's a link in that, so that link refers to this. So A refers to a link. So when you add A on your page, you're telling the browser that this is a link, and when he clicks on it, it'll open the page or the post specified within the href attribute. We'll talk about attributes in a bit. So we finished h1 to h6, and then we talked about paragraph tag. We also talked about link tag. However, the most commonly used HTML tags are divs. So these are general purpose elements often used to just contain and position the elements. So divs, you can inspect any page and mostly all you see is divs. So these don't really have a meaning. Unlike the h2 tag, which stands for heading, a div can be anything. So you can put anything inside a div and then position it, twist it, style it the way you want it. So divs are basically containers. So if you inspect an Elementor page, you can see a lot of divs, and all of those are basically containers. So HTML works in a way called nesting. So you can put two HTML elements. So within the opening and closing tags of one HTML element, you can put another. So let's actually put a link between this div, and we'll say link, and also within this div, let's add a heading. So I'll say heading 2. Let's close this heading. Again, you need to close the opening tag always, and let's specify the href attribute for the link. So we'll just give it a hash link. Let's preview this, and you can see how it's built. Whenever you inspect using the Chrome inspector, when you click on this, so whatever is on a bit right onto the div is basically a nested element. So within this div, you have two more divs, and this is the closing tag of this div. So you can close this. Again, let's click on this. That expands and shows the elements within this particular div. So within this div, I have two more divs, and within each div, or in this div, I have some particular UL. UL stands for a list, unordered list. We'll talk about that later. So this is how HTML works, and this is how your WordPress is built. So most of the pages are basically built on divs. So there are multiple elements within your div, and div stands for a container. We have unordered lists or lists. And how are they used? Well, I'll show you the practical example of it. So when you have a navigation menu on your website, it's essentially a nested unordered list. So you can click on inspect. So it can be your menu designed with your page builder or your theme. You can see UL here. So UL stands for unordered list. So within this, we have list items that stand for LI. So each list item or each link is actually a list item, and within that you can see the A tag, which stands for link. I just explained that right now. So the menu is effectively an unordered list, and each list item has a link nested inside. So how is this all really important? Well, when you want to target the list item, or let's say I want to target this home, I need to first specify the class name of this, and within that I need to target this particular item. So it will be selector space dot Elementor nav menu space the class of this, which is menu item. So that's how we target elements, and understanding the nesting of HTML is really important. Like I said, even this has a div container. So div is a general purpose container, and it's used across your website in almost all the pages and posts. The next kind of elements are buttons, images, and a lot more. So let's actually drag widgets and inspect those and see what they're made up of. So I'll just drag in an image widget in Elementor. I'll pick an image. I'll just click insert media. I'll right click on this. Again, I need to minimize the side panel, inspect, and I inspect the element. I get to know the HTML of this image. So this is the syntax for an image. So it's img and it doesn't need a closing tag. This is rarely found, and it's always a good practice to include closing tags for almost all elements, even if they don't need it. But anyway, since Elementor did this dynamically, you don't have to worry. Just understand that image is img. src stands for the URL of the image that you are trying to display. So it's on my own website, so I just specify the URL of the image and class. That's it. So this is all your image is made up of. Again, let's drag in a button widget and see the HTML that generally displays the button. So I'll just drag in a button. I'll minimize the side panel again. We've already done this while we were doing Elementor basics videos, but again we'll just revise our basics. So our button, as you can see, is a link which is nested within divs. So this is the widget, and within that you have all the divs, and finally you have a link which has a class of Elementor button. So when we wanted to target Elementor button, we just said selector space dot Elementor button, and that would actually target only the button. But if you say selector, that will target the whole area or the whole widget highlighted here. So that's the reason we need to know class names, and in order to know class names, you need to understand the HTML structure. So within this widget, you can see there's an arrow down. That means all the elements below this are actually nested elements, or the elements contained within this div. So within this div, I have two more divs, and within this I have an icon. Again, icon is, I didn't pick the icon, so this actually stands for that particular icon, and this is the widget container itself. So within this I have button wrapper, and within that I have a link. So our Elementor button is essentially a link wrapped within a div, and there is also a button widget, so it doesn't matter. Again, let's inspect another one. So this time we'll inspect a form. A form is a special HTML element. That's cause it takes user input and gives it to the backend. So you can do stuff like collecting emails, getting leads, and do lots of stuff. So people can contact you using this, and forms have a lot of applications, and the most common one of them is email marketing. So you can collect the emails, you can put the form in a pop-up, and then you can collect the user's email, and then so let's inspect this form. So I'll just click on inspect. So form, like I said, is a way to get input, and within this you have something called, or an HTML element called input. So you can see that here, and form elements. So form is like a big container again, and within that you have various input elements. So for a particular form you can have various kinds of input elements. So here it says, again, the attributes are different for different elements. So if it's a text, the type is text. So let's change the emails type to something else. So from here I'll pick something else, maybe a radio. So I'll just add two options, and this is another kind of input element within a form in which you can pick one of the two options. Let's inspect this, and the HTML for that is input, and value is another attribute that specifies the value of that particular form element, and you can see the type is radio. So form elements come in various types: text, radio, drop down, which stands for select. So let's actually make this a drop down menu. So we'll pick select from here, and let's see the HTML for that. So I'll just click on inspect, and you can see it's a select HTML element, and within that I have two more HTML elements which are actually the values of that drop down. So this is a select HTML element, and other elements are basically input elements. So you can click on this. So this is input type is equal to text. So within form you have various kinds of input elements. You can simply change the type of input elements and inspect them and learn various kinds of inputs. And finally you have a button. So let's inspect the button. I just clicked on this, right clicked on the send, and I just clicked on inspect, and this is an actual button. So like I said, button is an HTML element and it has a class. So when you click this button, it'll have something associated with it. So here it says button type is equal to submit. So when you click on this button, the form is submitted at the backend, and you can connect it to MailChimp or whatever marketing service you use. So this is again another way of understanding HTML. So just drag in any widget from Elementor or Gutenberg. You better be a stock widget so you can understand all that clearly. So you can drag in social icons. Let's drag in social icons widget, and let's see what this widget is made up of. So I'll just right click, inspect. Like I explained in the icon widget tutorial, icons are effectively font awesome icons, and they're made up of I tags. So you can see that here. So within div I have a, so this is essentially a link with an icon. You can see that here. So within this whole link element we are nesting icons. So this works both as a link and an icon. In our case it's actually a social icon. So that's how the elements are built, and anything with a down bottom arrow, it means the elements right next to that or the elements below that or the children. So that's how you target elements. So if you have to target this single widget, you'll just go to this. You can also use the nth selector. So the main class or the main container is Elementor social icons widget. So if you want to target only the Facebook icon, you'll just say nth child 1, and that will give the link. So within that you can target the I element, which is the icon. So there are a lot of ways to target elements. You can target them by HTML tags, you can target them by class names, you can target them, there are a lot of that. We'll discuss that in the CSS tutorial, but now you get a complete idea of what's going on. So basically every widget is made up of various HTML elements. So most of them are nested within divs. So these divs are like containers. They'll have various kinds of HTML elements, and each HTML element has a meaning. Speaking of that, you can have elements, you can have a lot of elements, but in HTML5 they have defined few more general purpose elements. So they have section, they have header, they have footer. So your browser understands what they are, and not just your browser, even the search engines understand what they are. So when you drag in a heading widget, you get a lot of HTML tags. So you can choose to pick one of the tags, and few other widgets have this option where you can customize the type of the HTML tag used for this particular widget. Also, when you inspect, you can find all the HTML elements here at the bottom. So here there's an element called footer. So when you click on it, it's basically the site footer. So these are the elements, semantic elements, so they have a meaning. So some of them are header, footer, your sidebar. So it has an element called aside. So not only your browser understands these, also the search engines understand what kind of content it is. So if you have an article, you can use the article element or article HTML tag, and that will tell the search engine that you're going to write an article. And within that you can use the section HTML tag to specify that whatever is wrapped within that section is a part of your article. And if you have a sidebar or content that is not that important, you can use the aside HTML tag. So there are a lot of these tags. The most important of them are aside, main, which stands for the most important content on your page. You usually use it for the most important piece of content, and aside again for sidebar sort of stuff, header to display your website header, footer like you see here, your website footer. But here I have my header designed with Elementor, so it's actually a div. Again, Elementor uses a lot of these divs. Rather than using header tag, they just use a div and they try to format it anyway. So if you're using your theme header, you can right click and inspect and it will be a header, not just a normal div. So that's the basic HTML concepts that you need to understand to clearly know what's going on within your website. So lot of elements have lot of attributes. An image has lot of them. So width and height are actually attributes of an image. src is an attribute that specifies which image to pick on your website or maybe on another website. Class will specify the CSS class name so that you can target it with the CSS or JavaScript. Again, a lot of them have classes. You can see that here, and there are few more attributes defined by Elementor themselves. So here you can see there's a section element or section HTML element. So within that they have classes, and each element can have different classes or a lot of classes. Class is again an attribute which is mostly used to target using CSS. Again, here you have ID attribute which is again used to target the element by using CSS or JavaScript, and you have title attribute as well. So that will specify the title of the page or that particular element. So you can see that within the head here. So here there's a title, and within that you have the title of your particular page, and that will be shown on top of your browser window. Name and value, and meta is again specifies the metadata of the page. You have language attribute for the root element or the HTML element that will specify the language to be used, and even it has some particular class to target it. This script is a script tag which says whatever is in between this is JavaScript, and you can also have style tags which are basically CSS. So anything within this style is CSS. Again, I explained this in the Elementor HTML widget tutorial. So that's the whole HTML that you need to know. So HTML elements are nested like this. So when you click on an element that is minimized, or when you click on an element that has opening and closing tags such as this head, all the elements within are nested elements, and few elements have purpose such as links, titles and so on, and few don't have any links such as the div. So div is like container, you can use it for anything, and you can see that within this div we have a form element. So form is the form that we just talked about. So here they have some Ajax stuff going on, and within that they also have h1, and within that they also have button. So all that, and they also have another span. Again, span is kind of similar to div, except that it does all the stuff in line rather than doing it in a new line. So that's it. So that's the HTML that you need to know. And if you want to learn more about HTML, the easiest way is to drag in all the widgets. So drag them in one at a time and right click, inspect, and see what it's made up of and how it's made up of. So there'll be a lot of divs, and within which you'll find the main HTML elements. Again, divs are general purpose elements. So this gives you a brief overview, and I recommend you change the themes. I have WordPress active as of now. You install 3 to 4 free themes, build a page with the widgets supplied by these themes, build another page by the widgets supplied by Elementor, and build one with Gutenberg. Again, once you have the page, right click, inspect each and every element and find all the HTML elements within. So again, HTML elements have closing and opening tags. There are a lot of general purpose elements, and there are a lot of specific elements. So form collects the data, and each form has a sub element which is input that takes different forms of input from the user. So form is one of the main HTML elements that provides interactivity in or interaction in websites. So buttons, again, when you click on a button, something happens. We've seen that in the button widget tutorial. So HTML is all about displaying the elements. So you can take any third-party widget, plugin, or a block and just make something out of it. Right click, inspect, and whatever you see on your website is HTML. They have attributes, so each attribute specifies particular information about an element. So style attribute is used to add inline CSS to an element. We will talk about that in CSS tutorial. So that's all you need to know in HTML. And HTML is really simple. Again, just drag in every widget and see what it's made up of. So I can simply drag in this text editor widget. I can simply right click and inspect what it's made up of. It's just, so the text within is wrapped within P. You can see that here. And there is a general container that has a class of Elementor text editor. So when I wanted to target the text editor or anything within the text editor, I'll just say selector space dot Elementor text editor. And if I want to target an image within that, I'll just have another space and I'll say img, which stands for the HTML tag. Again, we'll discuss that in CSS tutorial. Also, you can pick different elements from here, and these are all HTML elements that you see here. So that's how HTML works, and it's supplied by your themes, page builders, and any plugin that shows information that is viewable by the user. So this is all that you need to know to understand WordPress, and together with CSS you can design or change any minute detail on your website according to your need or your client's needs. So HTML is really important. Again, you don't have to write HTML, it's all supplied for you by WordPress. Different page builders, different themes, all those have their own HTML. Of course the classes differ, but the HTML among them is common. So that's it for now. Stay tuned for the CSS tutorial. Make sure you subscribe, and after learning CSS basics and watching all the videos on the channel, you'll be able to design any kind of website or tweak any part of your website without scratching your head. So that's it for now. Thank you for watching. See ya.